In the Sicha in Pashas Va'era, in Chelek Aleph, in the first Sicha in Pashas Va'era, the Rebbe brings the Chakira Benegea to the mitzvah of Haseba. We know that on Pesach there's a din of Haseba, that there's a mitzvah to eat, V'hu Mesev derech Smeil, derech Cherus, and the Rebbe brings two Eifanim to understand in the mitzvah of Haseba. One is that Haseba is a prat. The halacha is that Emasai Tzarech Lahasiv, the mitzvah of Haseba, is beikar by Achilas Matzah and Shtiyas Dalet cases. That's what it says in halacha, that's what you see in the Sugi of the Gemara. B'meila, you could learn that the whole din of Haseba is a prat in Achilas Matzah and Shtiyas Dalet cases. That just like there's other dinim in how to eat the matzah and how to drink the dalet cases, so one of the dinim in the Eifen Achila Shtiyah is that they have to be Haseba. The second Eifen says the Rebbe is fakert, that Haseba is a mitzvah klolos b'fnei atzma. L'chol hadayis, the ikar chiyuv Haseba is by matzah and dalet cases, like you see in the Gemara and in Halacha. But according to the second Eifen, that's because when is a person makayim this mitzvah b'fnei atzma of Haseba through eating matzah and drinking dalet cases by Haseba. Haste us that in matzah and dalet cases, besides that they're a separate mitzvah for themselves, they're also a prat in Haseba that through eating matzah by Haseba is makayim mitzvah Haseba. The general nafkamina, says the Rebbe, is if you ate matzah without Haseba, does that affect the achilas matzah? Or not? Is it just a problem in not being makayim the mitzvah of Haseba? L'chol hadayis, the halacha is, like we'll see that if you ate matzah or you drank the cases, those things that are supposed to be behaseba, and you didn't do haseba, so you have to do it over. That means whether I say that the reason for the haseba is for the matzah, and if you ate matzah without haseba, felt in the mitzvah for matzah, or you say it's for haseba, and what you're missing is the mitzvah of haseba, it's just the takanas chachamim was that the haseba should be together with matzah and dalet cases. Either way, if I was missing the haseba b'shas I ate the matzah or drank the cases, I have to eat over the matzah, whether because I wasn't yetzer matzah yet, or because I wasn't yetzer haseba, and haseba needs matzah as a prat in the mitzvah of haseba. So the halacha l'maisa, according to both stadim, is the same, that you have to eat over the matzah. Nevertheless, as the Rebbe, there will be a nafkamina la'halacha l'maisa, as the lashon in the Sicha. There will be a practical nafkamina that comes out from why I need to eat over the matzah a second time if I ate it the first time b'shalei b'haseba. Nafkamina is the second time do I have to make a bracha al achilas matzah. If I say that the reason that I ate it the first time was a chsaron in the mitzvah of matzah, because haseba is a prat in a matzah, the din of achilas matzah, the din of haseba is how to be yetzer properly, the mitzvah of matzah. So when I'm eating a second time matzah, it's in order to be mashlam the mitzvah of achilas matzah. Mashenkin, and therefore I have to make al achilas matzah. Mashenkin, if the reason why I'm eating it over is just because I'm missing in the mitzvah of haseba, and in order to fulfill properly the mitzvah of haseba, I have to now eat matzah by haseba. So the second time is just a kiyum mitzvah haseba, it's not a kiyum mitzvah matzah, and obviously there's no place for a bracha al achilas matzah. So, first of all, just an important thing to point out, l'chayra, in this nafkamina la'halacha l'maisa. So first of all, the Rebbe says in the Ha'ara, the Rebbe adds, that it's possible that this halacha l'maisa, for this nafkamina l'maisa, is also only me'ikr hadin. It's not l'maisa mamish, but it's me'ikr hadin. And the Rebbe explains this. He says, we see in Shulchan Aruch, in Tahara 12, Fima shekasav haramas in Tafayim Beis Siv Zayin, and Al Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Siv Tezvav, the Rama says that by Kais Gimel Vidalid, if you ate it without Haseba, and if you drank, those cases, the third and fourth case without Haseba, if you drink it over, you'll need a new bracha beir priagafen, and that will create an additional side problem that it's nira kemesef ala cases. You don't want to have the pchashash of nira kemesef ala cases. Therefore, says the Rama, so if you drank those two cases without Haseba, don't drink it over. And b'seimach the Ravya, that the Ravya says that bisman hazeh ein derech lahasiv, and you b'chlal don't need a seba. So even though we paskin that you need a seiba, but in such a case, be seimach on the Ravya, where the drinking an extra kais will cause additional problem of achshash of nira kamesav ala cases. Based on that, says the Rebbe, if we're going to say that eating the second kizayis matzah seiba would be a suffix, whether you make a bracha ala chilas matzah, so la halacha lemaisa, if there's a suffix, so therefore making a bracha would be achshash of a bracha levatala, lepeil, based on that achra of the Rama, we would say here too, don't make a bracha, and be seimach on the Ravya, like the Rama says, who says that anyways you don't have to do a seiba, so therefore if you don't have to do a seiba, so you were yetsa matzah the first time, and there's no need for a bracha the second time. That's what the Rebbe says in the Ara. Lefiza hamavur b'fnim hu me'ikra din. The nafkamina that the Rebbe says about whether you need a bracha al achilas matzah when you eat over the kazayis without with seiba the second time is me'ikra din l'payil, since it would be a suffix that halacha l'maisa would be not to make a bracha the second time. So important to point out, first of all, in this Ramah, so the lashon of the Ramah in Tafayim Beis, the Ramah that the Rebbe brings in Tafayim Beis, Siv Zayin, the Ramah, it says, Kol mi shetzarech haseiba, im achal eishasa b'lei haseiba, lo yatsa v'tzarech lachzer v'lecha v'lishtes b'haseiba. The din is, the Mechaber says, that if you ate not b'haseiba, you for sure have to eat over b'haseiba. Eat or drink over b'haseiba. And like we said, that din, the Rebbe Nemzan with a pshitas in the Sicha, is understood according to both sides. Says the Ramah, Haga, v'yeshem im de bizman hazeh de ein derech lahasif k'day Ravya lismei chalav sheb'diavad yatsa b'lei yasif. He brings an aguda from Rishonim that b'diavad al kapanim there's the dasa Ravya. The Ravya says that you b'chlal don't need a seiba bizman hazeh. So even though we don't paskin, we say it's a das yachid, we paskin that you need a seiba, but you could be seimach on the Ravya le'inyim b'diavad. This Yeshemrim says, the Aguda says, that b'diavad, if you ate something that you were supposed to eat b'seiba, shalei b'seiba, al kapana b'diavad, you don't have to eat it over. So the Ramah is machriya, v'nirali, depends if it's something that you could eat it over or drink it over b'seiba without causing any problems, like the matzah, unless it's the afikeman. So to eat over another kizayis matzah is not going to cause any problems. The cases, those cases that are not going to cause any problems. So drink it over or eat it over b'seiba. Don't be seimach on the Ravya, even b'diavad. But those cases where drinking another case will cause a problem, which is, says the Ramah, im shasa case shlishi revi b'seiba. Im loishas, I'm sorry, case shlishi revi b'seiba. Ein lachser v'lishtes b'seiba. Because the third or fourth case where you would have to remake over the bracha beir piagafen if you drink it over, the yeshbech shash nira k'meisif ala cases. So there taka be seimach on the Ravya. Aval b'shnei cases rishenis yachser v'yishta b'lei bracha. He brings this from Minhagim. So the Ramah is basically saying that even though the first Yashemrim, the first day has said that since the Ravya said that Bizman Hazeh you don't need a seiba, so you never need to do something over b'diavad, b'seimich and Ravya linyan b'diavad. The Ramah says no, don't go so far. Even b'diavad, if you did something that requires a seiba, shalei b'seiba, do it over b'seiba. But at least b'seimich and Ravya in those cases where if you're going to do it over, it will create a side problem. That was the svara that Rebbe brought in the Ara. So there, b'inyan b'diavad, b'seimach and Ravya to avoid causing a side problem, which is by case Gimel Dalet, causing the problem of the chash of nira k'meisav ala keiches, since in those two cases you would have to make a new bracha beir piagafen. And this says the Ramah, uvechein ba'achilas matzah. What's v'chein ba'achilas matzah? This din that the Ramah said by Dalet cases is also by achilas matzah. B'pashtus you could teach the Ramah v'chein ba'achilas matzah that just like by cases where it will cause a problem, you shouldn't do it over. So too by matzah, which means that the only time by matzah you should eat over the matzah b'seiba is the first kazayis matzah, not afikeman, because afikeman is a problem to eat after afikeman, just like the case gimel v'dalid. And also by matzah, don't make a bracha of al achilas matzah. Don't do it without a bracha. By cases we're talking about the birches hanenin, By matzah it would be the birchas hamitzvahs, but the same svara that the Ramah said by the kaisis is also there by achilas matzah, which is exactly what the Rebbe says in the Ha'ara. You would be able to say that this is what the Ramah says when he says v'chein b'achilas matzah. It sounds like this is taka what how the Mishnah Brura is teaching the Ramah, because the Mishnah Brura in Sifkat and Chav Beis, on the words of the Ramah v'chein v'achilas matzah, he says hainu sheyachser v'yechel hakizayis matzah ubeloi bracha. But that what the Ramah is making the tzushta b'achilas matzah, that achilas matzah is the same as dal kaisis, that you have to eat it over, because by matzah there's no problem eating it over. But beloi bracha, just like by dal kaisis, and he adds that by afikamin you shouldn't even eat it over. But that it doesn't sound like he's teaching that that's the meaning of the Ramah. He's saying umihu that's the din. But the fact that matzah you eat beloi bracha, meaning without a birchas al achilas matzah, because that's the only bracha that would be a shaila by matzah, it seems like the Mishnah Brura is teaching that in the Ramah, that's what the Ramah means v'chein b'achilas matzah, that just like by dalit cases where there's a problem, by dalit cases the problem is achshash of nir kameisal cases yisemech and Ravya, so too by matzah where there would be a problem, which would be, since it's a suffix as a birchas hamitzvahs would be a problem, you could be semech and Ravya leaning the birchas hamitzvahs. Clearly, the Rebbe is not learning this pshat in the Ramah, because the Rebbe says this doesn't bring this from the Ramah. The Rebbe just brings that according to what the Ramah says by dalit cases. So we would be able to say, according to what the Ramah says by dalit cases, so the Rebbe Shiur says, says, according to Ramah, we would be able to say the same thing by matzah. So clearly the Rebbe is not learning that that's pshat in the Ramah. Of course, if the Rebbe learned that the Ramah says that you don't have to bring a bracha, make a bracha, then the Rebbe would be bring the din from the Ramah that the Ramah says, but that the Ramah says for a side reason, and you could bring a raya from that to either way. But the Rebbe is saying this as a side thing, that according to the Ramah we could say this achra, and therefore say it's only a shayla mikra din. And l'chayra, that's based on the Alter Rebbe, that it seems that the Alter Rebbe does not teach this way in the Ramah. Again, maybe someone will argue that the Mishnah Brura is also not saying this pshat in the Ramah. The Mishnah Brura is just saying that's the din. I don't think that's the lashon. The lashon he says is hainu. When the Ramah says v'chein matzah, he says hainu shechayzer va'oichel u'b'lei bracha. That seems to be the way he's teaching in the Ramah. But Akapanim in the Alter Rebbe over there in Siman Tezvav, the Alter Rebbe clearly is not teaching the Ramah that way, because the Alter Rebbe in Siman Tezvav says Kol mi shetzarich lahasiv v'achal ishasa b'lei yaseba tzarich lachzer v'lecha v'lishtis b'yaseba mi'ikra din. Alav ava lefi sheyesh emrim shebizman hazeh ein tzarich lahasiv klal b'medinis elu yesh lismech al divrayim le'inyan sheb'diavad yatsa b'lei haseba. That's the first day of the Ramah. The Yesh Emrim that always l'gabi b'diavad you could be seimach on the Ravya. Umikol makom l'inyan achilas matzah teiv lahachmer lachzer v'lechel b'aseba. By matzah there's no problem, there's no chisaron in eating it over. So why be seimach on the Ravya by every b'diavad, even b'diavad, eat it over b'aseba, because most days don't hold like the Ramah. And what are you going to lose? What about dalit cases? He says, by dalit cases, it depends if it'll create a problem. And the Alter Rebbe is mefaret. V'chein in case sheni im shasa b'lei yaseba yachzer v'yishta b'aseba. Ve'in tzarich lachzer l'varach be'er pe'agafen anyways. And then mashenkin case gimel and dalit, and case rishon, it depends if he made a tanai, and the Alter Rebbe says the arichos of the dinim by the cases. So the Alter Rebbe brought the inyan of matzah before the dalit cases and the pratim of dalit cases. So clearly, the Alter Rebbe isn't learning that when the Ramah said v'chein linyan matzah, it means that by matzah you shouldn't make a bracha, because the bracha will create a problem, and l'gabi the bracha you should be seimech on the Ravya. Because if the Alter Rebbe learned that pshat in the Ramah, then the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring anywhere that din of the Ramah, because the Alter Rebbe brought down the halach of matzah before he brought the halach of the alt cases. So the Alter Rebbe, there's no way that you could touch ein the dinner that he's saying by matzah, that includes the fact that you don't make a bracha. So it's hatnish kenart that the Ramah would bring a din by matzah about Sai eating it over and Sai not making a bracha, and the Alter Rebbe would be mashmit the fact of not making a bracha. So clearly the Alter Rebbe is learning that when the Ramah says v'chein le'inyan achilas matzah, it's just lagabe the ikir hadin. Yeah, he brought the pratim, the Ramah brought the pratim by dalt cases, and now he's going back to the ikir hadin that sarach lachzer v'lesif, the way he started off the sif. And I see this also in the Kaf HaChaim on this Ramah, v'chein b'achilas matzah, ratzalemer diyesh lahachmer v'lachzer v'lechel b'haseba. He brings this Dakimesha is Dalid, and Raz is Tezvav. He brings it from the Alter Rebbe Taka. So he brings from the Alter Rebbe this inyan that the pshat in the Ramah is just the Ikar Adin that you have to eat it over. So the Mishabura seems to learn otherwise in the Ramah. The Alter Rebbe and the Kaf HaChaim brings this from the Dakimesha, so then it's clear in the Ramah. But the Alter Rebbe clearly Al Kapanim is learning Pshat in the Ramah that's not included in the Ramah, and therefore based on that is the Rebbe in this Ha'ara says this just as an additional halacha that we could be machriya based on the Ramah, that since a bracha could create a suffix bracha levatala, we would be able to be machriya legabi the bracha anyways if it's not 100% sure to be seimech on the Ravya, al pi divrei haramah, and therefore the shaila is only be'ikra din. Okay, so this is the nafkamina the Rebbe says. Now, the in the Olam HaYeshivas is Ragil is known to say this Chakira by Haseba b'shem the Griz, the Brisker Rav. In his Sefer Al Rambam in Perek Zayin Halacha Zayin from Hilchas Chametz Umatzah, he discusses the Chakira. He says the Tutstadim brings the Rayas a little bit differently, and he brings comes to different maskanas, like we'll see soon. So just to point out a few of the things that he says. So the Griz discusses this Hakira. He brings a raya that the Rambam holds that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, because the Rambam says im heisef b'chol hasuda b'shar achilasi yishtiyasi im heisef areze mishubach. If you would say it's a prat in matzah and dalet cases, vi pasu zagin hareze mishubach to do haseba by any other part of achila shtiya, that's not achila shtiya the mitzvah. So this raya the Rebbe brings in the Sicha, in the Hemshech HaSicha, in Siv Daled, the Rambam says Ameisa b'chol asuda hareze mishubach, it's Eisa mitzvah min hamufcher. But the Rebbe is doichet this raya. He says, "B'yantif to kol asuda mitzvah." So therefore, could be a seba as a prat in the mitzvahs that you do on this night, but a chsudas yantif is one of the mitzvahs that you do on this night. L'chayra the hasbara in this dechia of the Rebbe, a teisvis beer, is because on this the pshat that it's a sudas mitzvah, since it's a sudas yantif, so a sudas yantif that you eat on Pesach, that's part of, because what the Rebbe says that if it's a prat in mitzvahs, it's a prat in those mitzvahs that in yanim is cheiros. So even if I say the suda of yantif is a mitzvah of sudas yantif, asat sutamit cheiros that a seba should be a prat in the mitzvah sudas yantif. L'cheira, the answer is pashat sudas yantif of Pesach. The suda of the suda, that mitzvah of eating a suda is because that's part of celebrating the yantif. That's why it's part of the mitzvah of Pesach. Befrat on Pesach, that yesh lahesef, one of the simonei haseder is shulchan aruch. All the simonei haseder part of the Seder Lo Pesach, that's part of the mitzvahs of Laila Zeh, that in Yonam is the Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. The Shulchan Aruch is part of that, because the Shulchan Aruch has in it part of the Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, and like it is Bepashtas, the Sudas Yontif of the person feeling the covet and the einig of the Yontif of Pesach, of Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, on Pesach is part of the Hischeres of Yitzias Mitzrayim, this Suda. Allahar, like the Gemara says, like we know, the Rebbe brings it a few times, Atu Rosh Chodesh lemusafin ahani letmidim loyahani, that on Rosh Chodesh the carbon tamid is also, you eat the carbon tamid you have every day, but the tamid of Rosh Chodesh has to do with Rosh Chodesh, so it's a honey. Mela, the same thing, the Pesach is a honey to this mitzvah of Sudas Yontif also. If I would say it's bechlal, not a mitzvah, so then we pass to Zagan as a Seba zal zayin prat in them, that the way to be Mekayim it is only Be'aseba if it's not a mitzvah b'chal. But if it's a mitzvah, so then it's a strong svara. Any mitzvah that's part of the Pesach, even though I have this mitzvah on other Yomim Tevim, but the mitzvah of the Suda of Pesach, it's the Sudas Yontif of Pesach, is in Yom Acheros, and therefore it has a Kapanim Alta mitzvah min Amufchar din Yin Seba, that's a Prat in Cheros. So that's how the Rebbe is deiche this raya. However, in the Griz and in the other Achreinim adds a strong point to this raya, which, like we'll see, the Rebbe addresses that in the Ha'ara. He says, first of all, what would be the point of doing a seba by Shar Sudasi? But he says the Rosh argues. The Rosh holds that Haseba is a prat in mitzvahs matzah. He says, what's the raya? Because the Rosh holds that if you ate matzah shalei b'Haseba, you would have to eat it over b'lei Haseba. Why do you have to eat it over b'lei Haseba if it's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma? Now this raya itself, even if you say that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, nevertheless the Chachamim were misaken that the Haseba should be together with mitzvahs matzah, and therefore if you ate the matzah shalei b'Haseba, you have to eat it over. And like we said before, that's the hanacha right away in the beginning of the Sicha, and that you have to say no matter what. Because even l'dvarav, even according to the tzad, that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, according to the Rambam, says emas haitzrichin lahasev b'shas achilas matzah. Like he has to also say that this mitzvah b'fnei atzma, the tzir, the eifin hatakana, was that it should be b'shas those mitzvahs that are there achiros b'shas achilas kazayis matzah and shtiyas dal cases, etc. Elamai, he says another word. That if you say that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, so when you ate matzah shalei b'Haseba, hat nicht gefällt in matzah, you were missing the mitzvah of a seba, and you have to eat the matzah over, not mitzad matzah, but mitzad mitzvah haseba. But then what's it going to help to eat another kazayis matzah b'Haseba? The second kazayis matzah is already not a mitzvah of matzah, so you're anyways not eating matzah b'Haseba. You want to eat b'chlal b'Haseba, so eating b'chlal b'Haseba should be by anything. If it's not a prat in matzah, that means that the matzah you are yetze b'shleima, so what are you going to gain by eating another kazayis matzah shalei b'Haseba? That's his raya. And since the Rosh says you have to eat over the matzah, is a raya that the first matzah you weren't mekayim mitzvahs matzah. And therefore, when you're eating over a matzah b'Haseba, the second time you're eating it is mitzvahs matzah. Because otherwise, what's the verdient? So the Rebbe in the Ha'ara, the Rebbe in the Ha'ara 11, bavarns this. L'chayra efshar leichiach midin za atzmi shaseibu t'nai b'achilas matzah ki b'mhoisa seibu chayv b'fnei atzmi v'chasha ochal akazayis matzah shlei b'seibu kvar kiyam mitzvahs matzah mokim l'chay v'eida pamas akazayis matzah b'seibu kivin shekvar kiyam mitzvahs matzah. L'chayra, if I say a seiba is not a prate matzah, so eating matzah over is not matzah anymore. It's not mitzvah's matzah. And the Rebbe is shayla. He says, Aval Eina. Ki al piza shasei buchiyah b'fnei atzma. And the Chachamim were misaken the tziyur of mitzvah saseba, that it should be while you're eating the matzah. Eina pira shechiyuva chol keshemekayim mitzvah achilas matzah, ki em shetiknua ba'achilas matzah lefi shem zeicher legula v'cheirus. And ken yesh lem eshav shekvar ki em mitzvah matzah chivu Chacham lechel eda pa matzah zeicher legula v'cheirus b'aseba. So the Rebbe says, and then the Rebbe brings the Yerushalmi, which we'll see in a minute. But the Rebbe says, if a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, why did they say that the emasai chayav chiyuv zeh lekula yalma? When is this mana chiyuv b'shas achilas kezayis matzah or achilas dalet or shtiyas dalet cases? Because the seba, the mitzvah b'fnei atzma, is, which is to show derech eros. How do you show derech eros for a seba? Through doing the mitzvahs that are derech eros b'haseba. And therefore they said, when should I be mekayim this mitzvah of a seba, which is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma? B'shas, I'm doing the other inyanim that are derech eros, and I'm doing them b'haseba. Says the Rebbe is mechadish in this ha'ara, but the Rebbe says it as a davar pasha. It is not the pshat that when I'm doing something that's a mitzvah of derech eros, and I do that mitzvah b'haseba, through that I'm mekayim the mitzvah b'fnei atzma of haseba. That haseba is b'shas matzah, because the ma'isa of achilas matzah is a inyan of cheros. Even when I'm not being mekayim mitzvahs matzah, the teichen of matzah, the mitzias of matzah, the cheftza of matzah on Pesach is cheros. Matzah shows on cheros. And therefore the rest of the matzah that I eat on Leil Pesach is an inyan of cheros, and therefore they said matzah is b'aseba. So even though the second kizayis matzah that I eat is not a mitzvah of achilas matzah, because I was already mekayim the mitzvah, it still helps for the mitzvah of haseba, because the matzah is an inyan of cheros, and haseba is to do an inyan of cheros b'aseba. The same thing by the Dalet case is even stronger. So, first of all, the Rebbe brings a Yerushalmi right afterwards. That the Yerushalmi says, "Oisei kizayis sh'adam yetzi be'pesach tzarich lo eichlei meisif," and that says the Yerushalmi says that when is the mitzvah of haseba? B'shas oisei kizayis. B'shas the person is eating that kizayis that is yetzi the mitzvah. According to the vart of the Rebbe now, it's not connected with that kizayis matzah. It's not the mitzvah of matzah that has to be b'haseba. It's the inyan of matzah. It's the ma'isa of achilas matzah, even if it's not the mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, the Yerushalmi says, Eisei kizayis. But derech klal, the first time you eat matzah has to be b'haseba. The first time you're eating matzah is Eisei kizayis. But there's on the Iker question, there's another answer. There's a Maral. The Maral is in Gvuras Hashem, and he brings it in the Shitta. There's a diok that the Rebbe brings in the Sicha, and that the Achreinim bring in the opposite way, we'll see soon. It says, the Rebbe brings the Gemara, Rabbi Shiur ben Levi says, Hashama she'achal kezayis matzah yatsa. Shama she'yatsa achal kezayis matzah yatsa. I'm sorry. Rabbi Shiur ben Levi says, Hashama she'yachal Shashama she'achal kezayis matzah kshu mesiv yatsa mesiv in loy mesiv loy. Vashamash Eira Kizayis Matzah, when he was Mesiv, he was Yetzah. Soon we'll see the Gris brings this Gemara as a raya to the Rambam. But you see that when he's Mesiv, he's Yetzah. But there's a diok. What's the Yatza? Yatza is mashma his Yetzah b'di'evet. L'chayra, if he ate a kezayis matzah and he did a seba, so he did the mitzvah. What yatsa? Once he finished the kezayis matzah, there's no more mitzvah of matzah anymore. So the maral that the Shita Mekubetzes on Psachim brings down, the maral makes this deal. Why is it b'diavad? Yeshli lumit says from this he wants to learn out a chiddush din. Shekol ma sha'eichel matzah b'leil Pesach tzarech haseba. The afagav the yetzer b'kizayis echad im achal harbe hakel hi mitzvah achas. V'yeser adif she'kol achilase b'mitzvah lefichach yesh leilechel kol achila shel matzah b'seba shudera cheres. Medayik from this Rambam ameir de kechidish lahalacha de maral. That when you eat matzah on Pesach, like this misvara, we would say the first kezayis matzah is a mitzvah. After that, you were yetzer a mitzvah and you're eating matzahs, you're eating crackers. Says the Maral, the fact that it says that the shamash is yotza b'diavad, which means l'chatchila he had to do more than just eat one kezayis b'seba, is a raya, is a yisoid. He says that when you eat matzah b'leil Pesach, any matzah that you eat below Pesach is a mitzvah. Even though you're only mechuyev tira kezayis, but the entire matzah that you eat is a mitzvah, and therefore lechatchila you should do a seba throughout, not all of the matzah that you eat throughout Leil Pesach. B'meila, the Gemara is mechadish that nevertheless, if the shamash ate only the kezayis matzah by seba, he's still yetzer, even though he should have done haseba by all of the matzah that he ate. According to the Maral, Geitarab, anyways, that question of the Griz, that's his whole basis for his hechrech in the Shita Sarash. And the question that the Rebbe is about learning in this Hara. So there's another answer. The answer is that the matzah is a mitzvah. There's some mitzvah by all the matzah you eat the first night. It's taka big chiddush. But by lulav we see this, by daled minim we see there's like shiur mitzvah, like the Rambam says that hayaminig anshe Yerushalayim, they would walk around with the daled minim a whole day. Weiss says there was some inyan of a mitzvah in it, not just the nanuim, which is called b'chlal the shiur mitzvah. Sukkah is minadin. Every suda that you eat is a extra mitzvah, even though you don't have to eat the suda. By matzah there's a svara that the Rebbe says that the Rebbe doesn't hold of it to some degree, but the Rebbe brings in other places and Chassidus says this somewhat this svara. There's a svara that there's some kiyum mitzvah, and another svarim says the svara that there's some kiyum mitzvahs matzah kol shiva whenever a person eats matzah on Pesach. So even though we don't say that ladina, but to say that there's some mitzvah of matzah and all the matzah that a person eats the first night, hatach tasanart. The Rebbe doesn't bring this answer. Not a raya that the Rebbe doesn't hold of this answer at all. The Rebbe says it's at the question. There's a stronger answer that it's not negiyah the mitzvah of matzah. It's the chefts of achilas matzah. But akapanim we see there's an additional answer. So there's the hechrech in the Rosh that you can't say that the Rosh says that matzah is a mitzvah, that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. And that you were yetzer matzah the first time, because then what's the point of eating more matzah? So we see there's two answers on that. There's a point of eating more matzah because the etzem maisa of achilas matzah is a maisa of cheirus that needs a seba, or because then any matzah that a person eats the first night is a mitzvah, is part of the mitzvah. The Griz is maskana, his mahalach is, says the Rambam says ha-meisiv b'chol asuda harei ze meshubach, is a raya that the Rambam holds that a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. The Rosh says that when you ate a kazayis matzah lo and you have to eat it over by seba, is a raya that the Rosh holds a seba as a pratim matzah. That's how he goes, and then he emphasizes the shamash shachol kazayis according to both shittas. Maybe we'll come to that. The Rebbe brings the two different rayas, like we'll come to, And the Rebbe says there's no machlekes, there's two dinim in a seba, and both dinim are l'chol ha'deis. So I just want to point out that maskana of the Griz is Tamuha Ma'id. In Shulchan Aruch, it says, in this sif that the Rebbe is bringing, Kol mi shetzarech haseba, im ochel ha'shasa b'lei haseba, lo yatsa v'tzarech lachsa v'lecha v'lishtes b'haseba. That's the din of the Rosh. That whatever you ate without a seba, you have to eat over with a seba. We're not talking about the Suda. We're not talking about the Sudas Yantif, that you have to eat the Sudas Yantif over by seba. Das less man the Palakena hat das nicht getracht. In the end of the Sif in the Ramah brings Al Chatchila Yosef Kol HaSuda, which is the din of the Rambam. If the Rambam and the Rosh were a machlekes that's based on two different shittas in a seba, whether it's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma or a prat in the matzah and the dal cases, haval toch nicht kahat kinard, that the Mechaber and the Ramah in the same sieve should bring both dinim, which is like taking two ends of the rope, two sides. It's clear that it's not a machlekes. It's muchach that the Mechaber and the Ramah have nicht gelernt as a machlekes. Elamai, you have to say like the Rebbe's maskana that it's two dinim that both are there according to both days. So in the Iker Chakira, the Rebbe says in the Pnim of the Sicha two nafkaminas. First, an nafkamina in svara, if it affects his kiyum hamitzvahs matzah, or no, it's just affects the kiyum mitzvahs haseba. And in that nafkamina, Gufay says it would come out a nafkamina la halacha l'maisa, if when you eat over, do you have to make a bracha al achilas matzah or not? And then in the Ha'ara 12, the Rebbe says that nafkamina is also only me'ikra din. And then he says a nafkamina l'maisa, if someone ate matzah below haseba, and then he comes in a matzah where he no longer needs haseba, which we'll come back to. But in the Ha'aras, there's a third nafkamina in Ha'ara 9, which is not written mamish as a nafkamina, but in the Makir Hadvarim it said more as a nafkamina. Here it's more as a tzarachiyim. Rebbe says in the Ha'ara dain tzarachiyim l'fi asvara da haseba hi mitzvah b'fnei atzma. If you say a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, b'm'i efsher lachila shtia nimtza b'veis asurim achayitzibaza, someone is unable to eat on Pesach, so he's not going to eat matzah or dal cases or anything else. Rebbe gives the example, he's b'beis asurim, or there could be the example, someone who is a chayla, Rachmana litzlan, and therefore he's not able to eat. There's the famous tshuva of Rebbe Kiva Eger, b'negeit girl who was a chilanis, and she wanted to do the mitzvah of achila erev Yom Kippur. She needed Rebbe Kiva Eger to tell her that she's pater and to be mefalpa. But there's a matzah, if someone is a chayla, he's not able to eat anything. Hayesh chiyuv behaseba l'chud. So does this person have a mitzvah of haseba by itself? So if you would say that haseba is a prat in matzah and all cases that without haseba you're not yetzer those mitzvahs. So someone who's unable to be mekayim those mitzvahs, he's bebeis asurim or whatever reason, so then there's no chiyuv haseba, because haseba is only there as part of those mitzvahs. But if you say a seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, even though the tzir ha-mitzvah, the eifenat takana was to eat matzah b'seba and to drink the alt cases b'seba, but maybe someone who's not able to eat the matzah and drink the alt cases because he's b'veis asurim or whatever, at least do haseba. And in the end, the Rebbe says lahar midin sukkah al derech zeh, that by sukkah, even though the bracha of Asher K'Shanim Tzesvanu on mitzvah sukkah is nistaken, the bracha is nistaken only by achila, and everything else is nigra achar achila, but someone who's not going to eat, so then he'll make the bracha on the other ifanim of kiyum mitzvah. So maybe by haseba also, even though the chachamim were misaken that the haseba should be together with matzah or dal cases, but that's only if a person is eating matzah and drinking dal cases. If he's not eating matzah or drinking dal cases, then he should do the seba as a inyan b'fnei atzma. So in the course of asking this question, the Rebbe says, the basis of the question is, Sharei mehada einei meise b'fnei Rabbi, mashma da seba greda gamkin derech erasu. Says, what's the basis of the question? If they were misakin haseba only b'shas achilas matzah and shtiyas dal cases, maybe the haseba is only a derech when it's together with achila shtiya. Who says haseba b'fnei atzma has a benefit b'chal, even if the mitzvah of haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, but the only way it's possible to be mekayim that mitzvah, that chiyuv, is together with achila shtiya. So if the person lepayel for whatever reason is not eating or drinking, he has no way of having that ma'ila of haseba. Who says there's any benefit? The Rebbe says that's not correct. Sharei meihad heb me'enei meise b'fnei rabbi mashmas deseba greda gamkin derech. The fact that a person, Talmud b'fnei rabbi, doesn't do haseba is a raya that haseba is derech, even haseba by itself. And the Rebbe fears this. Why doesn't it say this? Din in the Pesachim yishleimim nedlei shchicha klal. So this ha'ara is ton bir nesaf. What does this mean? Sharei meihade einei meise b'fnei rabbi mashmed haseba greda gamkin derech. The Rebbe is proving, saying, l'chayra, what's the question? Maybe even according to this sad, the only time that haseba shows on chayros is when he eats or drinks haseba, does some mice of chayros haseba. And therefore, if he's not eating or drinking, there's no benefit. What's the gain of doing haseba b'fnei atzma? Says the Rebbe, no. Even according to this sad, and even though the takana of haseba was together with matzah and dal cases, but haseba b'fnei atzma shows on chayros. V'haraya, because a Talmud b'fnei rabbi doesn't do haseba. Why doesn't he do haseba? Haraya that haseba b'fnei atzma, haseba greda gamkin derech. That's the pshat in this raya. That a Talmud b'fnei rabbi doesn't do haseba means he doesn't eat b'haseba and he doesn't drink b'haseba. It doesn't say anywhere anything besides that. That if the din of haseba is only by achila shtiya, so the exclusion of a Talmud b'fnei rabbi from haseba is also only b'shas achilas matzah shtiyas dal cases. V'shteit b'chlal adin that he doesn't do haseba if he's not eating or drinking. So where do you see any raya or basis or mucker from the p'tur of a Talmud b'fnei rabbi from haseba that there's an inyan of chayros in a haseba, even if it's haseba greda, even if it's haseba that's not accompanying achilas matzah and shtiyas dal cases? So if you look in the Moker Hadvarim, there's a little more Asius. In the Farbrengen Tafshin Chavtas. So there, in Sichos Kodesh, says a whole other shtickli. So B'deichik Leimar, that Einin Tzarech Lasel, Lefi Shacheres HaMizbatis Beheseba, Hu Dafke Kishu Eichel Beheseba, V'Heseba She'ein Ima Achila, Ein Ameira Acheres, V'Yishchiva Ba'alma. Says, I would be able to say that Heseba is not Cheres. Heseba, you're lying down, person lies in bed, it's not Cheres, he sleeps at night. For Heseba to be Derech Cheres is Dafka when it's an Achila with Heseba. And in that case, I wouldn't have a basis for this whole Nafkamina, for this whole Shaila. The Rebbe says there, Hine ha'emes einekin, al derech like he says in the Ara. V'gam ha'seba shaloi b'shas achila meira achiros. V'raya lazeh, mima shemevur b'shulchan aruch da'eved l'fnei adoni v'talmud b'fnei rabbi lo yesebu ki aser linik chiros b'fnei adoni v'rabbi. The raya is from the din in Shulchan Aruch that ha'eved and ha'talmud l'fnei rabbi don't do a seba. Olachayra bishleim is a Talmud mechuyev b'mitzvahs matzah. Af shegam ze meira acheiros muvan dareu din teira. V'lei akru davar ze gam ibnei kavid harav. Chemuvan b'pashtas mima shekasav ish imei v'rav tiro. Ves shabseise tishmeira shata v'chayav b'kvedi v'aderechta b'nidin didan ari ata v'rab chayav b'achilas matzah v'chein l'peitra. Says you can't patra Talmud l'fnei rabbi from achilas matzah. Mashenke b'negil l'dal cases shezeh gufa takanas chachamim halei heimamru v'heimamru v'lomo le'patru es ha'eved gam mishtiyas dal cases shehu inyan shel cheiros b'fnei rabbi. Umizem, and then it says in the Sichos Kodesh says chaser ksas. Umizem muvan shalei ashtiya v'chulu hi inyan amar l'cheiros al shedafka seba hitnua p'ula shel cheiros. V'lachein rak zeh bitlu be'eved. Achacheiros shebedal cases ain't tnuya shel cheiros kol kach sheyivatlu eisi b'fnei rabbi. So there's more over here. Even with the more, it's l'cheira needs a lot of beer, and it says chaser k'tzas, and in the Teras Menachem seems to say the same exact words and the same cheshbon, and there it doesn't say that it's chaser k'tzas, so that's supposed to be considered more complete. Over here it seems to be developed like this. So the Rebbe says that there's a whole other piece over here to the Rai, a piece of the puzzle. The Rebbe says, l'cheira, matzah itself is chayros, and dalet cases themselves are chayros. So just like we say a Talmud b'fnei Rabbi doesn't do haseba, even though there's a mitzvah of haseba, but he doesn't do haseba because the chiyuv deiraisa of Meira, the Rabbi, is deiched haseba, kilu. So for the same reason, he also shouldn't do the matzah and the dalet cases. So meila matzah, there it brings ishi mevav tiroat vavicha chayav b'kvede. Matzah is a mitzvah deiraisa. So you can't be deiched the mitzvah of matzah, even though matzah is chayros when he's b'fnei rabbi. But dalet cases is a derabanan, and the dalet cases itself shows on chayros, just like haseba shows on chayros. Why weren't they deiched dalet cases? Say hey mamru v'hei mamru, and a Talmud b'fnei rabbi shouldn't drink dalet cases, just like he doesn't drink haseba. Is a raya that the chayros in dalet cases is not enough of a, is not a stira to cover rabbi that they should be deiched b'fnei rabbi. So still, what's the raya? Maybe the chayros of dalet cases is not enough, is not a stira to cover rabbi, but the chayros of haseba b'shas shtiyas dalet cases, that's already a stira to cover rabbi. But only haseba b'shas. Where do you see from here that haseba b'fnei atzmei is chayros? But now that we have this extra piece of the raya, l'chayra, the raya will be like this: that haseba, we're going like the svara, haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzmei. But it says there's a mitzvah to do haseba because haseba shows in chayros. When is the mitzvah to do haseba? When does haseba show in chayros? When haseba is together with another maisa that shows in chayros, which is either matzah or dalet cases, because matzah and dalet cases both have in them an inyan of chayros. So when I combine the chayros of the matzah or the dalet cases together with the chayros of haseba, so then I'm fulfilling the extra mitzvah of haseba, of the chayros of haseba. Dalet cases, even though it's a maisa of chayros, it's not a chayros, that it's not enough of a chayros to be a stira to cover rabbi, to make us say that Talmud b'fnei rabbi should be exempt from this chayros. Chachamim could have pattered a Talmud b'fnei rabbi from dalet cases, just like they pattered him from haseba, and they didn't say that. Haste us that even though dalet cases is an inyan of chayros, but it's not such a shleimus in chayros. Now, so when I'm doing haseba b'shas dalet cases, that the maila in the haseba b'shas dalet cases is because dalet cases is a maila of chayros. And they said that Seba should be a Maisa of Chayros. And they said that Seba that shows on Chayros should be together with a Maisa of Chayros. It's obvious that the Iker indication of Chayros is from, so there's a harkava of two inyanim over here, of the Chayros of the dalet cases, and of the Chayros of Seba, that comes together with the Chayros of dalet cases. But the Chayros of dalet cases itself is not such a big show of Chayros. So when I have two separate inyanim, and one of them themselves is not such a big indication of chayros that should be a stira to cover rabbi, and when they come together, they're a stira, must be it's because the chayros of haseba is such a strong indication of chayros that it's a stira to cover rabbi. So even though, they want this indication of chayros to come together with a mice of chayros, but the chayros shebazeh that causes the stira to cover rabbi, that because of that we say Talmud b'fnei rabbi shouldn't do haseba, is mitzad the haseba, not mitzad the dalet cases. That's l'chayra derai. From this, the Rebbe is proving this strong yisaid that Haseba itself is a indication of Cherus, and therefore, if you couldn't do the Shtiyas Dal cases, even though they wanted the Haseba, the Shleimus of Haseba is together when it's with something else of Cherus, but that other thing doesn't have the main inyan of Cherus. And therefore, the main Cherus is the Haseba itself. And therefore, if you can't drink the Dal cases, you should still at least do the Haseba, because the Haseba at least have the Cherus. L'cheira, that's the Pshat in the Raya. I think it's still Ton Bir Nesaf. I want to just point out, having said this, the Rebbe says, according to two of the Ifanim, Yetzei Lanu Din Chadash, in the Sichos Kodesh, in the Farbrengen itself. Just there, the Lashon is stronger. In the Sicha, in the Likkutei Sichos, it's Adayin Sarachim. There it's Yetzei Lanu Din Chadash, which means it's clearly said as a third nafkamina. And another thing to point out, so the Rebbe Bavarns, L'cheira, if there comes out this nafkamina, which means this big Chiddush Din, so how come it's not mentioned in the Peskim, Allah Alamaisa, that someone in Beis Asurim, V'chayetzi Bazeh, Daf Tana Seba. So in the Sicha, it says a little, in the Ha'ara, in the Sicha that we just saw, so the Rebbe says the reason it doesn't say is Lo Shchicha Klal. In the Sicha, in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said two other reasons. One if in the Rebbe says Lefisha Emes Husha Seba Hitanai Ba'amatza. This is a din that would come out late tzad, that has Seba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Then it should say, but maybe the Peskim don't say this because they learn Seba as a Tanai in the matzah. So this, l'cheira leit the maskana of the Sicha, that there's both dinim. We can't say this reason, because then sof kosof the Peskim should have said Lefia Emes. Then you do have to say this chiddush din. But the Rebbe says beis lefishu din pashat kol kach shein tzarich la'amre. It's pashat. If there's a mitzvah of Haseba, even though the takana is amos tzarich la'aseh b'shas achilas matzah and shtiyas dal cases, but if someone is not doing that, there's still a mitzvah of Haseba. Right? Pashat v'shagam mishein le'lech ma'alech tzarich la'aseh. So in the Sicha, the Rebbe is saying a third reason why in the Ha'ara and the Sicha, because ain't a shchicha klal. But in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe said two additional reasons and asbaris why it could be it's not mentioned in the Pesach. Now, in the second nafkamina that the Rebbe says, nafkamina, if he ate a kizayis matzah without heseba, and then nishtana hamatzav be'efen sheshuv eine mechuyev be'heseba kegen she'achshav yeshiv hu lefnei rabbi. So when he ate the kizayis matzah without heseba, so like we said, l'chol hadayis, he has to eat over the kizayis matzah. According to both studim in the Chakira, you have to eat over the kizayis matzah, either to be yetzer the mitzvahs matzah or to be yetzer the mitzvahs heseba. But the nafkamina is if now he's yeshiv, he's a talmid yeshiv b'fnei rabbi, who's parted from heseba. So if the reason why he has to eat over the matzah is because he wasn't yetzer mitzvahs matzah, so he has to eat it over, even though now he's anyways going to eat it below heseba. But if the first time he was yetzer mitzvahs matzah, he was just not yetzer mitzvahs heseba, and now he's anyways not going to eat heseba, so then there's no point in eating over the matzah. In Ha'ara 13, the Rebbe says it could be that even if you say he wasn't yetzer mitzvahs matzah, but he's still not going to be mechuyev to eat the matzah over, because the reason why there was a problem with his mitzvahs matzah was because of the lack of heseba, because there was a t'nayim matzah of heseba. If he's now also not going to eat it heseba, le'yaviach klum. And the Rebbe brings from Yalav Yaveh. By Yalav Yaveh, it's there's a din if you forget Yalav Yaveh on Rosh Chodesh, you have to daven over Shemini Esrei. There is pashat l'cheira that it's not that the Shemini Esrei is a prat in Yalav Yaveh. The Yalav Yaveh is a prat in Shemini Esrei. That if you're missing the Yalav Yaveh in a Shemini Esrei that's supposed to have Yalav Yaveh, is that's felt in the Shemini Esrei. He wasn't yetzer the chiyuv of davening Shemini Esrei. Nevertheless, and therefore you have to daven over Shemini Esrei. Nevertheless, if in the second Shemini Esrei he's also going to be missing Yalav Yaver, because the second Shemini Esrei will be at night when it's no longer a Shchedesh, so then there's no point in davening over Lo Yarviach Klum. The same thing, says the Rebbe, you could say a svara by matzah. So in Ha'ara 14, the Rebbe says on this, Va'afim timtza loimar, shemikivan shekvar chal alav chiyav haseba kedem sheba l'rabbi, muchayiv hu lachzer acher his damnus l'kayim mitzvahs haseba, nafkamina ba'ofen shi efsher lo'yoid l'kayim mitzvahs haseba lo'ylech milifnei rabbi kegen shirabbi tzarech le'v'chayitzi bazeh. The Rebbe says, maybe you could say a svara that over here he's going to have to go away from Rabbi and be Mekayim mitzvahs haseba because he was already mechuyev in haseba. So the ha'ara is Omer Dershuni. What's the pshat? That means there would be a way to say that the tzadei hachakira, the tzadei hanafkemina is that since now he's Yeshev Lifnei Rabbi, he Bechlal is not mechuyev to do haseba. He's pater behaseba. Or no, he was already mechuyev in haseba. Maybe he has to leave and go do haseba, and it's not an nafkamina. The nafkamina is in a case where there's no longer a possibility of doing haseba. There's no longer a possibility of going away from Rabbi. So, what's these two efanim that the Rebbe addresses, or is miramis to very, very bekitzer? One possibility to touch up this ha'ara is by Talmud HaYeshev L'fnei Rabbi, who's pater from haseba, v'chayetze bazeh, who are pater from haseba. There's two ways at looking at this patur from haseba. One way to look at it is they're pater from haseba because the kavod rabbi is deicha the din of haseba. Haseba is cherus. The din of kavod rabbi is deicha the chiyuv of haseba, and b'meila he's pater from haseba. And the same thing the others that are pater from haseba because the kavod or the chiyuvim that they have is deicha haseba. Al derech, like the svara that says in Rishonim about the patur of nashim by a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, that her chiyuv shibud lebaila is keilu deicha the chiyuv in these mitzvahs. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that at Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, because he has this chiyuv of kavod Rabbi, b'meila he's not mechuyev in haseba. The Chachamim, the Rebbe brought in the Farbrengen of Tafshin Chavtas that I mentioned earlier, the Rebbe brought the lashon hey mamru v'hey mamru. In the question why they didn't say it by Dal cases. But the svara to say that the Chachamim were mechayev haseba in such a case. Or you could say there's a svara by a isha that eina tzricha haseba isha b'fnei baila, that the vart is that it's not a chisaron in derech cherus. Without haseba is the same derech cherus. By Talmud l'fnei Rabba you could say the haseba there's no chiyuv haseba, because the haseba doesn't add to the derech cherus, because since he's yeshev l'fnei Rabbi, the yeshev is a complete derech cherus. We're not being deichet. There's a kiyum of derech cherus without haseba. When common nafkaminas, and could be it's a machlekes hapaiskim, these two ways in how to understand the Gemara. But a kapanim could be benegeya linyanenu. So if you would say that a Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, the chiyuv haseba is nitcha, the kavod Rabbi is ndeicha the chiyuv haseba, so then l'chayra would come out that a Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, so since he's b'fnei Rabbi, so when he ate the matzah, there was no chiyuv haseba because he's yeshev l'fnei Rabbi. The chiyuv kavod Rabbi took precedence over the chiyuv haseba. He's not mechuyev in haseba. Masha'en kain, if he already ate matzah before he was yeshev l'fnei Rabbi and became mechuyev in haseba, so even though now when he comes b'fnei Rabbi, the kavod Rabbi is deicha, now the chiyuv haseba, But the chiyuv that was already chal on him, he still has to be mekayim. Masha'en kain, if I would learn the other eifin, that the Talmud b'fnei Rabbi, b'shas he's yeshiv l'fnei Rabbi. There's no chiyuv haseba. It's not that the haseba is nidcha, but there's no din of haseba. He's not missing the derech cherus by not having haseba. Or like there's a yisay to say by nashim that this is the complete derech cherus. There's no extra cherus. There's no inyan haseba doesn't add to his cherus. So then I would have to say that even though he was yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi, even though he ate the matzah before he was yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi, and he was already nischayev b'haseba, but now that he's yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi and he's pater from haseba, there's no chiyuv, there's nothing missing in haseba. There would be no mokim to be mechayev him, to be mishtadel, to leave Rabbi, to go away from Rabbi, to be mechayev the din of haseba. So that could be the tut stadim va'afim timsalema, that the ha'ara gives a makim to tut stadim. Whether we could say that the fact that he started to eat matzah before he came b'fnei Rabbi is mechayev him to be mishtadel to do the seba, even though now he's yeshiv b'fnei Rabbi by going away from Rabbi. So the Rebbe leaves that as a suffix because maybe this is totally in these two ifanim. Lahoyer, there's a question which Mefarshim really address. Talmud b'fnei Rabbi is pater from haseba, so every Talmud should have a chiyuv to go away from Rabbi, to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba. Mefarshim asked that, I think in the some achreinim say Lichas Shlema, I think says that from this you see the big importance of l'kaktu pnei Rabbi b'regel. That even though through that he's not able to be Mekayim mitzvahs haseba, still it's chayiv lahakpa pnei Rabbi b'regel. But that question could be totally in these two eifanim of whether the haseba b'fnei Rabbi is dechuya or hutra. But akapanim, the Rebbe in the Ara seems to say no. Even if it's tchuya, but if you're melchatchila l'fnei Rabbi, so this chiyuv was melchatchila nidcha. It was never chal on you because when you ate the matzah, you weren't mechuyev. There's no chiyuv to be mishtadel to be mekayim l'seba like it's mashma bepashtos. But if I was already mechuyev in it and now it's being nidcha, then I would for sure have this chiyuv to leave, to find the opportunity, even to be mekayim the mitzvah. Mashakin, if it's hutra, then maybe even if I was mechuyev already, I wouldn't have this chiyuv. So that's l'chayra what the hara leaves two eifanim, but akapanim, even though you could say two eifanim in the nafkamina, but in such a case where even al yidei hishtadlus, he has no possibility of being mekayim, of eating matzah shaloi b'fnei Rabbi, kegoin sherabi tzrichalei, and whatever eifin. So there I would still have the nafkamina. That's b'derech efsher to Taicha Para 14. Another point, so in the first nafkamina that the Rebbe says in the Pnim, whether you are yetze matzah and you're eating over the matzah in order to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba, or you weren't yetze mitzvahs matzah, so that's not a nafkamina l'maisa like the Rebbe says, because according to both svaras l'peil, you have to eat over the matzah. The nafkamina l'alacha l'maisa, the Rebbe says, would be maybe b'negei to the bracha, whether you have to eat a alachilas matzah. And like we said before, the Rebbe in the Ha'ara 12 says that even that nafkamina you could say is only me'ikra din, but not l'maisa, because we could be saying l'alacha, you would be, since it's a suffix, you would be saying mechandiraviyah, who says bisman hazeh we don't have to do haseba. So just one ha'ara on this that I saw, that you could say on nafkamina l'maisa, l'alacha l'maisa l'ch'eira, even in this nafkamina, and whether you're eating over the matzah to be mekayim mitzvahs matzah, or you're eating over matzah and it's b'chlal not a mitzvah of matzah, it's just to be mekayim mitzvahs haseba. So I saw in a kavitz from the Bells of Kalil, and over there someone wrote a whole inyan about this shaila of someone who ate without haseba, and then he when he remembered and he has to eat it over, he's Yeshev Lifnei Rabbi. This tapakti he writes, which is the nafkamina in the Sicha, and he goes and he brings the griz, and he writes a number of the ha'aris in the Sicha and the rayas of the griz, and basically made a whole shtickle teira out of the Sicha with mentioning only the griz. But there he says a few svaras, and one of them he says a nafkamina. If someone ate the matzah below haseba, so he has to eat a nukazais matzah. He reminded himself after he ate the morer. So he has to eat over the kazayis matzah. If this kazayis matzah is just to be mekayim the mitzvahs haseba, so he'll eat the kazayis matzah and continue with the seder. But if he wasn't Yetze Matzah the first time, so he's even eating over the Kazayis Matzah to be Yetze Mitzvahs Matzah. The Seder on Pesach has to be Kefi HaSeder, that the first Matzah and the Morer you eat after the Matzah. So then Yesh Leimer, that after he eats the Matzah, he'll have to eat over also Morer to eat Ala Seder, because the first Matzah that he ate wasn't a Kiyam Mitzvahs Matzah. So the Rebbe brings the Chakira, the Rebbe says the Nafkaminas, and the Rebbe brings the Rayas, starting from Ois Gimel in the Sicha. So the first Raya the Rebbe brings that Haseba is a Tnai and Achilas Matzah, and not just a Matzah as a Tnai and the Haseba. It's from the Gemara, that the Gemara says, Hashamesh ha'achal kizayis Matzah, kishehu meisiv yatza, meisivin loy meisiv loy. So the Gemara is midayak dafka if the shamish is meisiv, he's yetza. If he's not meisiv, he's not yetza. Mizem mashma, says the Rebbe, that when you ate matzah b'lei haseba, you're not yetza, you deichevas matzah. Shaila is, what's pshat in the Gemara kishehu meisiv yatza? So the Rebbe says, to say meisiv yatza means mitzvahs haseba is a deiche gadol. The imkei maika mashmal on beloshem meisiv in loy meisiv loy. Harei pshita de keshelei heisiv lo yatsa chayvas haseba must be he's being mechadish that loy heisiv he wasn't yetsa mitzvahs matzah. Das heißt the Gemara sagt mefurish v'di tzad in the Chakira. So just to give the full picture, so in the Griz, he wants to say this Gemara is the Raya of the Rambam. This Gemara is the Mocker of the Rambam. Chaz Keshu Meisiv Yatza is mashma that the Shamish, when he ate the Kazayis Matzah Beseba, he's Yatza. He was Yetza B'diavad. It's mashma that there was something else that he was supposed to do, but he was Yetza upon him. Not that he did everything he was supposed to. Otherwise, what's the Lashon Yatza? Yatza is mashma B'diavad. From here, he says the Rambam learns that Ba'emes HaSeba is a separate din that you should do the whole time. B'chol HaSuda you should do HaSeba. It's just him Heisiv, the Shamish, if he was Meisiv, just by the Kazayis Matzah, he's Yetz. Mela, the Gemara is talking about Yatza Mitzvahs HaSeba, and Fakir, from the fact that he was Yetz only B'diavad, is a Raya that B'lechatchila, as a Reza Meshubach, he should be Meisiv B'chol HaSuda. First of all, that pshat is difficult be'etzem, because if Yatza B'diavad, that means that the Haseba B'chol HaSuda is not something that Hareze Meshubach, it's something L'chatchila that the mitzvah itself is Mechayiv. You were only B'diavad Yetza if you weren't Meisiv B'chol HaSuda. What's the pshat? That B'meisiv B'chol HaSuda Hareze Meshubach. But the pshat in the Gemara says already in the Taz. The Rebbe in the Sicha, in Ha'ara 24, where the Rebbe speaks about this inyan of Meisiv B'chol HaSuda, he brings the Ramah, or Re'ei B'taz Sifkat and Vav. The Rebbe is mitzayin to the Taz and Sifkat and Vav. The Taz and Sifkat and Vav starts the other way. That it says, what does it mean? L'chatchila Yosef B'chol HaSuda says from the fact that the Gemara says Hashamesh ha'achal kizayis matzah kashu meisiv yatza, dafka the shamash is yetza, is mashma that every person is not yetza unless he's meisiv b'chol hasuda. Says the ikar pshat that yatza kashu meisiv yatza, even though he wasn't meisiv the whole suda, Says in the Taz, Elamai, the Taz asks, is mashma that a regular person wasn't even Yetzer if he wasn't Meisav B'chol HaSuda. And the Taz for emphasis. But this whole pshat that he wants to say like the Rambam, that Kishu Meisav Yatza is the Chiddush, that even though he wasn't Meisav B'chol HaSuda, and from here we have a makar that Be'etzem you have to be Meisav B'chol HaSuda, and that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, doesn't address the diuk that the Rebbe makes. That's being medayik Meisav Yatza. What's the Chiddush in Meisav Yatza, and why Yatza only b'di'evet? The Rebbe says, you see the Gemara's medayik loy Meisav loy, that if he wasn't Meisav, he wasn't Yatza. That means from the Gemara that there's a Chiddush in loy Heisav loy Yatza, and that's where the Rebbe says is a deiche gadol. To be talking about mitzvahs haseba, it must be talking about mitzvahs matzah, and that's why from the Gemara is muchach that if you ate matzah b'lei haseba, you're not yitz. And the Rebbe brings further that so from the Gemara is a strong raya, even though you could try to farem it b'deiche gadol, but the raya is stronger from the Rosh. From the Rosh, you see that he learned like that pshat in the Gemara, because the Rosh has a suffix by the cases. And he brings a raya from this Gemara that what you ate or drank b'lei haseba, you're not yitza. Meisav in loy, meisav loy. And the Rosh says because of that, says beferish that because of that he learns the din that the kais that you drank without a seba is einei miminyan hakaises. In Ha'ara 18, the Rebbe brings the svara that maybe you would say a chiluk between dalet cases and matzah, that by dalet cases, kivan shu midrabanan ma'keves by haseba the heimamru v'heimamru. Since dalet cases is a din drabanan, so if you drank the dalet cases without a seba, it takes away from the whole dalet cases, and you're not yetzer. You weren't Mekayim mitzvahs dalet cases. But by matzah is a deiraisa. So the whole Rabbanan, even if you say that the Rabbanan made a takana, that a seba is a prat in dalet cases, but it shouldn't take away the kiyum ha-mitzvah, because the mitzvah is a mitzvah deiraisa. So the Rebbe says you would be able to say that misvara, but you can't say that in the Rosh. The Rosh is ein lachalek, because the Rosh is saying this din by dalet cases, his makir is from the Gemara that we just mentioned, Meisav in loy, Meisav loy, that's been neged to matzah. So then al karchach, the Rosh who's saying that it's ma'akev is saying this side by matzah, side by dalet cases. But misvara, the Rebbe says you would be able to make such a chiluk between matzah and dalet cases. So possibly, there's a famous taisvis, like we bring this yisaid of not being yetzer. B'di'evet is from the Rosh, and it's partially from Taisvis. In Taisvis and Psachim, the Gemara has a shaila which of the dalet cases need a seba, and the Gemara says a maskana mitzad safek kulu nami tzrichim haseba. Yeah, the famous Gemara. So Taisvis kulu nami tzrichim haseba. Taisvis v'chol dalet cases tzrichim haseba b'shas shtia. Yeah, it's separate in you. V'tzarech iyon im shachach v'lo yhesiv im yachser v'yishta v'chein im bekais shlishi lo yhesiv im yachal lachser v'lishtes b'aseba af agav de ben shlishi l'rvi lo yishta. So Taisvis adds this as a shaila by dalet cases. This din that the Rosh says b'pshitos, except by kais shlishi, the Rosh also has the shaila, but the etzem hadin that when you missed a seba, you have to do it over. Taisvis seems to say this as a suffix. But Taisvis says this suffix by dalet cases. Taisvis doesn't say this suffix by matzah, which is a shaila on what's pshat in Taisvis. What's the suffix, and why is the suffix by dalet cases? Was it by matzah pashut that you have to do it over if you did it shalei b'seba? By Kais Shlishi, where Taisvis has a suffix, yeah, it's because by Kais Shlishi there's a problem doing it over, Mashenkin by Matzah. But Taisvis originally has a suffix by all the cases, even the cases where there's no problem of Achshash of Nira K'meisif ala cases drinking it over. That's the first part of Tesis' suffix. So why does he have a suffix by the Dalet cases more than by Matzah? So one way to explain Tesis could be based on the Svara of the Rebbe over here in the Ha'ara, even though the Rebbe says that's for sure not the Svara Sarash, but that could be taka the Svara of Tesis, that by Matzah, that's a Deiraisa, you can't say that you're not Yetzah. So that it's taka Deiraisa. So therefore, if you did it without a Seiba, al karch of the mitzvah of Matzah, you were Yetzah. The Alt cases, which is a Derabanan, hey Mamru, hey Mamru, B'meila Tesis has as a Tzarachiyim. Earlier in the Sicha, this to the Shleimus opinion of this point, is Matzah Zaderaisa. Because of this, the Rebbe said, when the Rebbe brought the original Chakira, that even according to the Tzad, that Matzah without Heseba you're not Yetzah, it's only Midrabanan that you're not Yetzah. So in Ha'ara 10, the Rebbe said, the Deiche Gadol Leimar de Ba'achal B'lei Heseba Afkua Rabbanan Shetzivu Lahasef Migeder Achilas Mitzvah V'leikia Mitzvah Achilas Matzah Min HaTeira. Would be a deichik to say that you're not Yetzah Matzah Min HaTeira. But this is all, even according to the Tzad, that there's no difference between Matzah and Dalet cases. By both of them, you're not Yetzah. We could say, nevertheless, that there's a nafkamina that by Dalet cases, you wouldn't be Yetzah Midrabanan, so you're not Yetzah B'chlal, because the whole Dalet cases is the Drabanan. By Matzah, you would be Yetzah Min HaTeira, you would just not be Yetzah Midrabanan. But the Rebbe, in this Ha'ara, Ki'ilu Bavarans, that there would be a Mokim to say another Svara, that by Matzah you're not Yetzah even Midei but that would be a Deiche Gadol. That since the Rabbana made a mitzvah of a Seba, so maybe you would say that you're not even Yetzah Midei. So the Svara is found in some Achreinim, just to give the Shleimus Ha'inyan, that there could be a mocking to say that even though Haseba is a derabban, so in the end of this Ha'ara, of Ha'ara 10, the Rebbe brings the Eir Cheschayim, Sheish Smach LaSeba Min HaTeira. Kilu, the Rebbe is saying, if I would say that's tzad, that Haseba is Min HaTeira, then I would be able to say that you're not Yetzah even Min HaTeira. But if it's derabbanan, it's a Deiche Gadol to say that mitzad missing a din derabbanan, you're not Yetzah Deiraisa. But the fact that there's a possibility of saying that, it's just a Deiche Gadol, is L'cheira, we find this Svara in a number of places. Avuhin, L'cheira is the Teisvis and Sukkah, that Daf Gimel, the Teisvis brings a Svara that if someone is Yeshev Reishev Rubai B'Sukkah V'Shulchanei B'Seich HaBayis, that even though it's a Chesaron D'Rabbanan, nevertheless it could be that he's not Yetzah Yidei Chevasei Min HaTeira. So, and we find, so that's the main example. You could find, sometimes the Rabbanan made their takana in ha'efen that if you aren't mekayim the din according to the tanam of the Rabbanan, you're not even Yetzah Min HaTeira. By Kriya Shema, there's such a svara that the Chachamim made a gzeira that Kriya Shema has to be dafka ad chatzais, and if someone didn't fulfill it according to the takanas Chacham, he's not Yetzah mitzvahs Kriya Shema the Rabbanan. He's not Yetzah Kriya Shema even Min HaTeira, according to some Rishonim. So we find this in some places, but over here the Rebbe is saying l'cheira that it's a deiche gadol, even though it's possible to be such a thing. We find sometimes such takanas d'Rabbanan, but it would be a deichik to say that the takanas haseba d'Rabbanan should be oiked a mitzvah min HaTeira. Nevertheless, al kapanim, it could be oiked d'Rabbanan. But here in this Ha'ara that we're learning now, in Ha'ara to 18, the Rebbe says, because of this, because matzahs deiraisa, they can't be akered completely, that would give some basis to say that maybe by matzah taka they aren't akered at all, because the matzah you can't be akered completely. But Kadal cases that's the Rabbanan Himamru Veimamru, they're Iker the Mitzvah. So Misvari you would be able to say. The Rebbe says in the Rush for sure you can't say that, but possibly that Svara could explain the Tzarachian of Teisvus and Psachim Dafka B'Negia to Dalit cases. So the Rebbe brings the Raya from the Gemara, even though the Rebbe says that you could find for it B'Deiche Gadol, a clearer Raya in the Rosh, Mefurish Adover B'Rosh, and after that the Rebbe brings a Meredike Raya from the Yerushalmi. Whatever I saw who speaks about it, I didn't see anyone bring this Raya from the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, Yetzim b'matzav ben kiven ben shaloi kiven, mikivan shehesef chazake kiven. That by matzah, if a person doesn't know if he had kavanah or not, since he did haseba, then you say for sure he also had kavanah, milchatchila, and he wasn't thinking about it b'shas ta'achila, v'nigra hu achar machshavtei harishena. The question is, what does it mean, mikivan shehisev? Who says he had a seba? He didn't have kavanah, maybe he didn't have a seba either. And like the Rebbe says, v'adrab mistaber shegam lo yehisev. It should have said, im hesev, chazak kiven. What does it mean, mikivan shehisev? Is a raya from the Yerushalmi that without haseba you're not yetzer matzah, and b'meila haseba there had to be, otherwise you wouldn't be yetzer matzah. The Rebbe says you could be deicha this raya. Geshleimar dein tzarich lefarish im hesev. Mikivan shehesev is like saying if you did haseba then mikivan shehesev. But the pashtus mashma say Yerushalmi, the fact that it says mikivan shehesev and it doesn't say im hesev, that it can't be that he didn't do haseba, is mashma like the tzad that without haseba you weren't yetzer mitzvahs matzah, and therefore haseba is lo yimalit, it is not possible that he didn't do haseba. With this, the Rebbe in Ha'ara 23 says, Lefiza move on heitev nacha meir dikevar that shtims. The Rebbe brought earlier the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, Oisei kizayis matzah shehu adam yetzer by b'pesach tzarech la'ochlei meiseh. That the haseba has to be by the kizayis matzah shehu yetzer ba b'yidei chivas. L'chayra, why the kizayis matzah shehu yetzer b'yidei chivasei? If I say that haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, and even though they were misakin it by matzah, you have to say, since you could eat matzah over b'haseba to be mashlim, and the second matzah that you eat is the chnishken kiyum mitzvahs matzah, because matzah you're yetzer, you have to say that it's lav davke the matzah that is yetzer b'yidei chivasei. It's any matzah, because it's the Maisa Achilas matzah. So the Rebbe said in that Yerushalmi you would have to say that that's talking about Al Derech HaRagel, because since the Haseba that they were misakin by matzahs, the first matzah that you eat right away has to have Haseba. The first matzah that you eat is usually the matzah that you eat by Yidei Chivasei. It's just that if you blepayel didn't do haseba, so you could still fulfill the haseba with any ma'isa of achilas matzah, even though it's not the kiyum mitzvah achilas matzah. Hastas that both of these Yerushalmis are be'etzem arayet to the tzad. The fact that the Yerushalmi says that the matzah shu yitzir by yidei chivasei needs haseba is a rayet to the tzad. That matzah haseba is a pratna achilas matzah, but you could be deicha the raya because you could say it's al derech haragel. The Rebbe didn't bring this raya when the Rebbe went through the different rayas, because already in Ha'ara 11 he faram for the raya, right? As part of explaining what does it help to eat other matzah, and he faramfred how that stims with the Yerushalmi, so he faramfred the raya. But bepashtos that the Yerushalmi is toila the din of haseba with the matzah sheyetzei yedei chivasei is mashma like the tzad that haseba is a prat nachilas matzah. The same thing the other Yerushalmi that says kivan shehesiv chazake kivan is mashma bepashtos, even though you could be deicha. It's mashma bepashtos like the tzad that without a seba, you're not yetzer mitzvahs matzah. So in Ha'ara 23, the Rebbe says, according to this, both Yerushalmis you could faramfer, but both Yerushalmis are bepashtos mashma that haseba is a prat in mitzvahs matzah. So it stems that Yerushalmi is lishitasei, that since the Yerushalmi Bepashta says Kivan Shehesev that it's a prat in matzah, so therefore the Haseba has to be by the matzah Sheyetze by Yidei Chivase, because that was the whole Takanas Chachamim, that the way to be Yetze mitzvahs matzah is with Haseba, so therefore the other Yerushalmi says matzah Sheyetze by Yidei Chivase. And the Rebbe finishes off a Reha Oraha now, that the Rebbe said, yeah, Taka, you could for the Raya from that Yerushalmi, just like over here, the Rebbe said you could for the Raya from this Yerushalmi, but both Yerushalmis are mashma more like this Sad, and that's Yuvan Heitev, they fit with each other. I just want to point out in this, I said that there's also the Griz al Ashas, discusses this Inyan, that's brought down in the Haggadah Mi Beis Levi, the first Haggadah Mi Beis Levi, Omid Pei Zayin. And there, the Griz brings this Yerushalmi, the first Yerushalmi, the one in Ha'ara 11, not this last one about Kivan Shehesev. The Yerushalmi that Oisa Kezayis Sha'adam Yetze Ba Yidei Chivasei Tzarech La'oichloi Meisev. And somehow he brings a raya from this Yerushalmi to the other tzad, that Haseba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Because im neymar, they call ikr din hesev, who bekiyum ha-mitzvah d'achilas matzah. If you would say Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah, then what does it say? Oisei matzah sheyetze oisei kezayis. Pshita, of course that's where you need Haseba, because afterwards, if it's a prat in matzah, it's not shaykh to any other matzah that you eat, because any other matzah that you eat is not a mitzvah of matzah. So al korchach the gamba oisei kizayis, it's a din b'fnei atzmei of Haseba, and therefore you would be, it's be'etzem that has a place by the whole Suda, like the Rambam says, and therefore the Yerushalmi has to be medayik that the chiyuv is dafka by oisei kizayis she'adam yetze ba yidei chivase. That's what he says over there. Very hard for me to understand that raya, that it should be a raya gur to the other tzad. The question that he says, why does the Yerushalmi have to say Oisei Kezayis She'adam Yetze Ba Yidei Chivase? Bepashtas, that's up the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi is being magdir, and that's why the Rebbe learns Bepashtas that the Yerushalmi is a raya to the tzad that Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah. Elamai, the Rebbe says you could be deicha that it's al derech haragim. But the Bepashtas does up the Yerushalmi, that the chiyuv Haseba is not a chiyuv b'fnei atzmei, that lefiza could be by any part of the Suda. It's a prat in mitzvah achilas matzah. And therefore, when is this takana of Haseba by oisei kezayis shadam yetze ba yidei chivase? Hagufa, das statement, that's the kamat mefurish in the Yerushalmi. Can farem from the Yerushalmi, but if there's a raya from the Yerushalmi, it's to the tzad that Haseba is a prat in mitzvah achilas matzah. And that's why the Rebbe says over here in Hara 23 that the Muvan Heitev, that Yerushalmi is Muvan Heitev according to this Yerushalmi, from both Yerushalmis, is Bepashtas Ahichacha, that this Sad the Chakira that Haseba is a. Just want to say one more Ha'ara in this Sikha, even though there's Eila Mole, Masach Meretzu, Stelnzech. The Rebbe says, from the Gemara, from the Rosh, there's the Rayas that Haseba is a prat in matzah and a prat in the alt cases. Le'idach, be'ikir from the din of Haseba, from the Yisei din of Haseba, the tam v'chiyav Haseba, that b'chol dever der chayav adam laharis esatzme ki'ilu hu ba'atzme yatsa atem mishibr mitzrayim lefichach k'shesei adam balayla zet tzarech lecha v'lishtis v'meisev der echeiros. The chayav laharis esatzme is a chiyav b'fnei atzme, so must be Haseba is a chiyav b'fnei atzme. And in Ara 29, the Rebbe said the reason why the Rambam says the reason for the mitzvah is in order to be magdir that Haseba is a chiyav b'fnei atzme. So since there's rayas to both studim, so the Rebbe says lemaskana, there's two dinim in Haseba. There's a takanas Haseba that the Chachamim were misakin as a tanai in the oifen kiyum mitzvahs matzah and kiyum mitzvahs dal cases that they have to be by Haseba. And there's a din in Haseba that's a inyan b'fnei atzmei, And this the inyan b'fnei atzmei of a seba is also niskayim through that the matzah and the dal cases is b'seba. And with this, the Rebbe for emphasize various diyukim. First, just to explain in this a little bit. What's the pshat? L'cheira kumtei tzvei bazundere dinim. It says one takana of heseba, and the shaila was what's pshat in heseba, and the Rebbe brings the different ayahs. Says there's the takana of heseba. It's a takana in matzah, and it's a takana, a separate takana of heseba. It's still l'cheira. The vart is yisoidam echad. The takana of heseba is that the Chachamim said that on Pesach the laharis esatzme kilu hu yotzab mi Mitzrayim. This showing, feeling, and reliving and re-experiencing Yitzias Mitzrayim has to come out in the way that we feel the way we show ourselves in Agashmis Tikemaisa by the Leila Seder Midrabanan, and that's the din of Haseba. Is in them is that Tzvei Zachem b'meil this Yisayid that the laharis as atzma is to be leficha k'shesayid comes out in two pratim. Number one, so therefore there's a mitzvah b'fnei atzma of Haseba. There's a din that I have to conduct myself with Haseba in order to be laharis as atzma kilahu ba'atzma yotza b'Mitzrayim. Because the Chachamim were misaken that that's the way to show my personal reliving and feeling of Chayros. However, now that the Chachamim were misaken, that the way to show Chayros is with Haseba, and that's why there's this mitzvah b'fnei atzma b'Haseba of Haseba, but from that is mistaif nachadin, that are coming from the same Yisayid, that those mitzvahs b'layla zeh, that in Yonam is Chayros, which is matzah and dalit kaises, that the reason for eating matzah minatera is the chazecher lecheiros, and dalit kaises is zecher lecheiros, or I'll kapanim two of them, depending on what the pshat, the suffix of the Gemara is over there. But those mitzvahs that in Yanam is cheiros, and the takanas chachamim of Haseba is that the cheiros of Pesach has to come out in a ma'aseh bepeil of Haseba. So besides this mitzvah b'fnei atzma of Haseba to show cheiros, mitzad this takanas chachamim, that the cheiros on Pesach has to be mizbata, darf sich herausweisen in a pu'ula of Haseba, liktach in them, that those mitzvahs, that the mitzvah, which is matzah and dal kesas, has to be a inyan of cheiros, in order to be yetza that mitzvah, which means to be yetza that achilas matzah should be a inyan of cheiros. Also, according to this takanas chachamim, muzdach the achilas matzah zayin be'aseba, because otherwise, besides that you're missing the show of cheiros, you didn't do the matzah kedebai, because the part of the dinei matzah is the matzah has to be a zeicher lecheiros, and the takana of haseba is that haseba is the way to show cheiros, and the same thing with dal cases. So there's the two dinim that be yisaydam echad, even though they're two separate halachas, but it's all part of the hagdara of the chachamim that the laharis asatz mekilu hu yatsa mi Mitzrayim zok sechareis in the lefichach kishusay tzarach lecha v'lishtas v'meisa derech. So that's the yisay, that's the chiddush of the sicha, that there's two dinim, two chiyuvim in haseba, mitzvah b'fnei atzmei and tanai b'mitzvah sachilas matzah. So, in Ha'ara 31, there's a question with three answers, and I don't understand the first two answers, and I'm going to leave it for the Ten L'Chacham V'Yech Gameid. So the Rebbe said the Rambam also learns, the Rebbe is learning, this is according to all the days, all the shittas, everyone learns there's these two dinim in Haseba, the Rambam and the Rosh. Everyone holds of the two dinim. And with these two dinim, the Rebbe faremfert the diyukim in the Rambam. In the end of Ha'ara 31, the Rebbe asks, Umashalei Kosav HaRambam Shem Lo Yochal HaKezayis Matzah Be'Haseba Tzarech Lachzer La'ochlei Af Shesvir Lei Shehaseba Higam T'nai B'Mitzvahs Matzah Yesh Leimar. Chayra, as late the Rambam is Haseba T'nai in Matzah, So how come if it's a Tanaya matzah, then you have to eat over the matzah? Now, the Rebbe said in the Sicha, the Hanocha of the Sicha is that even if a Seiba is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, you still have to eat over the matzah. But that's what we say, la halacha l'maisa, that says you have to eat over the matzah. That halacha l'maisa is true according to both studies. Maybe that's not muchach to say according to the Rambam. The Rambam B'chlal doesn't say this din that you have to eat over the matzah. So the Rebbe says three answers. If the Rambam holds of both dinim, so why doesn't the Rambam say this din that you have to eat over the matzah, that you weren't yetsa matzah if I eat matzah b'lo yasema? Yesh loymar leikol atanaim shebemitzvahs or shebematzahs hem leikuva. Even if the Rambam agrees that Heseba is also a Tanai in Achilas Matzah, but that doesn't mean that the Rambam has to hold of the din that if I ate matzah without Heseba, I wasn't Yetzer. And like the Rebbe learns earlier, that L'chol days, even if I wasn't Yetzer, it's only Midrabanan, but Akapanim Midrabanan, I wasn't Yetzer. Lav Dafka, could be I missed certain Tanaim, but the Tanai is not Likuva, which means I was still Yetzer. 2. Second answer, Meklali HaRambam she'enei mevi dinim shlo yuzkaru b'shas. Even if the Rambam holds of this halacha, this nafkamina halacha, and holds that since a seiba is also a prat in mitzvah achilas matzah, so if you ate matzah without a seiba, bist du nicht yetzer. But that's a din was steht nicht befeirish in Gemara. The Rambam doesn't bring dinim that lehuskru b'shas. And 3, b'deichek rimza b'sperek zayin seif halacha ches, that maybe the Rambam is meramis to this halacha. So, if the Rambam is holds of the halacha and is meramis to the halacha, then it's very good and it's triumphant. But the first two answers, the Rebbe says maybe the Rambam B'chlal doesn't hold of the halacha, or he holds of the halacha, but it's a mechudish dika halacha, it's not mentioned in Shas. L'chayra, what's the raya that even according to the Rambam, Haseba is not only a din b'fnei atzmei, but it's also a prat in achilas matzah? What's the basis to say that? Because we have a rayas that Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah. What's the rayas that Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah? It's a tnai in achilas matzah. So that the Rebbe said in Sif Gimel. So there was the raya from the Yerushalmi. Perhaps that's the raya. Come to that. But the raya that the Rebbe brought was the raya from the Gemara and the raya from the Rosh. So the raya that we're saying from in the Shittas HaRambam, the hechrech that the Rambam holds like that, has to be the raya from the Gemara. What's the raya from the Gemara? Because the Gemara said, Hashama sha'ochal kezayis matzah, kishu meisev yatza, meisev in loy, meisev loy. The Rebbe was medayik. It must be when the Gemara says meisev yatza, loy meisev loy yatza. We're talking about the mitzvahs matzah. Heißt das, as steht in Gemara, loy yatza mitzvahs matzah. If you're going to say that the Rambam doesn't hold of this din, because some Tanaim are not liikuva, if the Tanai is not liikuva, but then al karchach the Rambam, you're going to have to say is learning meisev yatza, loy meisev loy yatza, doesn't mean loy yatza mitzvahs matzah, because the Rambam is learning that this Tanai in matzah is not liikuva. How is the Rambam learning the Gemara? Maybe the Rebbe will say the Rambam's learning the Gemara like the Deiche Gadol that the Rebbe said, that Heisev Yatza is Yetzer Mitzvah Saseba, that the Rebbe says is a Deiche Gadol, because what does it mean, Lo Heisev Lo Yatza? But Akapanim, that this answer, number one, that this Tanai is not Liikuva, is going to have to learn that according to the Rambam, the Rambam is learning different this Gemara. If the Rambam is learning different this Gemara, then Tzirik, what's the basis to say according to the Rambam that there's two dinim? Then who says according to the Rambam Haseba is a prat in achilas matzah? The whole hechrech is from the Gemara. Zakstudach as the Rambam learned the Gemara anders. Because if the Rambam is not learning that Gemara different, then you can't say aliba de harambam that this is a Tanai that's not likuva, and the Gemara state klar as is yeah likuva, loy heisev yatza heisev loy heisev loy. Elamai, you're going to say No, the Rambam maybe learns the Gemara like the Deiche Gadol that the Rebbe says. But still, there was the Raya from the Yerushalmi, even though the Rebbe said you could be Deiche the Raya. The Ein Tzarech Lefarish, but Sav Kosav, the Yerushalmi says, Kivan Shehesiv Chazake Kivan. What's the Hechrech that Hesiv? Is a Hechrech, it's a Tanai and Achilas Matzah. If the basis of to say that the Rambam holds that Haseba is a Prat Matzah is from the Yerushalmi, because the Dechia of the Raya from the Yerushalmi is not a strong Dechia, is weiter. What's the Raya from the Yerushalmi that the Rebbe said? Because how does the Yerushalmi say Kivon Shehesiv? Al Korchach, because you see from the Yerushalmi that without Haseba you're not Yetzeh Matzah. And therefore it can't be that he wasn't Mesiv, because if he wasn't Mesiv, he wouldn't be Yetzeh Matzah. It's Tzirik, we come in Zagan like the Rambam, that Haseba is a Tanai and Matzah that's not Likuva. If it's a Tanai and Matzah, not Likuva, you'll have to say that the Rambam is learning like the Dechia of the Raya of the Yerushalmi. Because if we're saying the Raya of the Shittas Rambam is from the Yerushalmi, Muzdach Zayin the Tanai is Likuva, because that's the whole explanation of why the Yerushalmi says Kivon Shehesiv. So I don't understand, if we're saying either of the rayas, which we're saying, that's why the Rambam holds there's two dinim, then how could we entertain a possibility that according to the Rambam it's not a Tanai Likuva? And the same thing, I don't understand the second answer. The Rambam doesn't bring a din shaloi niskar b'gemara lahaj. If we're saying the Rambam holds that there's two didim al karcha, because we're accepting the raya from the Gemara Shama Sha'achol Kazayis Hesiv in Loi Hesiv Im Hesiv Yatza Hesiv in Loi Hesiv Loi, or al kapanim from the Yerushalmi. Shteitach aber the din in Gemara in Yerushalmi. In Gemara, if because it's a deiche gadol to say the Gemara is talking about mitzvahs haseba, therefore we're saying the taich of the Gemara is Hesiv Yatza mitzvahs matzah. You're only Yetza mitzvahs matzah behaseba. So why is that not a din hamafurish b'Gemara? Unless you're going to say that the Rambam, the Raya is not from the Gemara, because in the Gemara you could for like the deiche gadol, and the Raya is beikir mikeach ha-Yerushalmi. And the Yerushalmi, even though the Yerushalmi says Kivan Shehesiv, but that's all a Raya from the Yerushalmi, on das heißt nicht mefurish in the Yerushalmi. Maybe. But Al Kapadim, the third answer is understood. The first two answers is, I don't understand. And Ten L'chacham v'yach kamayit.